want to fend for myself, and I want to build people up for them to fend for themselves. Hey everybody, Clark Fredericks here with another edition of the Free Like Me podcast. Guests come on, speak their truth, and leave their shame and pain behind. And then hopefully they'll give you some golden nuggets of advice to help yourself. My book, Scarred, it is rapidly approaching. July 29th is going to be here before you know it. Go over to Barnes & Noble or Amazon or anywhere else where they sell books and pre-order your copy. If you would like to be a guest on the show, come share your story, whatever your story is, whatever your journey in life has been, whatever trauma you've experienced, whatever successes you've had, and you want to share it, just reach out to me privately on any social media site or on my website, freelike-me.com. If you want to be involved in my coaching program, same thing. Reach out or set up a consultation call through any. All my social media sites have a connect link on them, and in the connect link is a Calendly setup for consultation calls. So pick a date and time, and we'll talk, and we'll get you going on new you. And this week I have a therapist who we follow each other on Instagram, and she specializes in narcissistic abuse and child abuse. And Dr. Christine is going to be here to give you some brilliant wisdom and ideas, and to help you if you're in that type of situation. So let's talk to Dr. Christine. Dr. Christine, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Clark.
I've done a lot of speeches in front of therapists, social workers, prosecutors, police, detectives that work sex crimes. And afterwards, so many of them will come up to me and say they got into that field because of their own childhood issues or something that occurred in their life. And for you, you're no different. You picked a field from what your mother went through in her early life, and you decided to make a difference that way. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, at age 11, I found out someone I loved had been abused, and I just was so enraged that anyone could ever harm a child in that way that it became my life's path. Yeah.
Did you know, like, at what point? So you found this out at 11 about your mother's childhood abuse, and like, how soon after did you say, I'm going to make a difference by going into a field like this?
Yeah, I wanted to be a teacher for sure, an educator. But then I immediately, by 19, I was volunteering for the local umbrella agency, and I did that work for 35 years. It was a domestic violence sexual assault agency. So I began volunteering for this agency, and at 20, I stood on the steps of the Waterbury City Hall, Waterbury, Connecticut, and spoke out against child pornography. I'm aging myself well before the internet basically gave carte blanche to perpetrators, right? To gain access to children. So yeah, I've always been very, very passionate about this work.
What did you get degrees in, just so we're sure?
So I have a bachelor's in teaching, a master's in social work, and a doctorate in clinical social work.
And for a living now, do you see, I know you have an online, program. Do you see in person also?
I don't see people in person any longer. I mostly do everything via Zoom. Yeah, so I'm a therapist, so I see people clinically, but I also educate. I educate attorneys, therapists, and coaches on all the aspects of what coercive control is and how it shows up in all the systems, and what's the difference between a perpetrator and a victim, because sometimes victims who are traumatized can behave in ways, as you know, that can seem problematic. And my primary focus is helping protective parents when they're parenting children who are being forced to go with an abuser.
When I introduced you, I said you specialize in narcissistic abuse and child abuse, and you just mentioned coercive control. What exactly? I mean, coercive control sounds like narcissistic abuse, but is there a difference?
Yeah, so I would say that a lot of times when people use narcissistic abuse, what they're talking about is people who have certain character traits, and that they use these character traits to abuse, right? And coercive control is a term, it's relatively new to our vernacular, but Dr. Evan Stark propelled it in a way that really helped us to define abuse more broadly. And so, Dr. Ramani and I are actually good friends and colleagues, and she often says, and we agree, that not all narcissists are coercive controllers, right? But all coercive controllers are narcissistic abusers. So, what Dr. Evan Stark, the way that he defined the term, is he said abuse is about coercion and control. Any abuse. And that's how I see it, is that coercive control is the underpinning of all abuse. If I want to abuse you, I'm going to use a variety of tactics to abuse you. And many of these tactics may not be physically in any way violent, physically or sexually violent. But the goal for me is to gain access, is to dominate. And so I do this using, of course, love bombing, future faking, where I tell you something great is going to happen in the future with us, right? Or I maybe gaslight and manipulate and intimidate and isolate. And I do all of those things so that I can continue to control you. Now, if I am a person in an intimate relationship with another adult, so like my ex, right? The goal is to diminish me so that he can continue to exert control over me, because he carries with him lots of shame. He cannot be someone who's not in control. That's how he deals with his shame. But if I'm a child predator, I'm going to take it to the next level. And so I always say that not all coercive controllers are pedophiles, but all pedophiles are coercive controllers. They all are exerting power and control, domination, using various tactics, threatening, intimidating, isolating, doing all of these. It's psychological warfare, and that the harm inflicted is something that, as a society, we don't even recognize how harmful it is. Our society, our systems are complicit. They do not hold these perpetrators accountable.
How does coercive control and grooming fit together?
Yeah, identical, frankly. So for me, right, abusers try to build trust. That's love bombing, isn't it? Right? That's telling you you're going to get certain things, telling a child, oh, if you just do this, we can go to the movies later, right? So it's building a relationship. It's preying upon a vulnerability. Children are the most vulnerable people on the planet. So this is when I talk about coercive control, I can talk about it in reference to children being preyed upon sexually, or an abuser who has maybe divorced or separating from a protective parent, a protective, safe parent. And now I'm going to weaponize the children against you. I'm going to make them dislike you, feel unsafe with you. So the coercion and control is all a grooming tactic. It's just the end result is sometimes sexual, like predating, right? Or it can be that I take the child away from a protective parent, right? So, yeah, the strategies are identical. And I just wish that people would be talking more about the fact that the strategies are the same. It's the character traits of the abuser, right?
Yeah. All right. Pathology of abusers. When we hear that term, what does that define?
I want to make sure, like for your listeners, right, that I'm also talking about child predators. So I've been doing this work in child sexual abuse since I was 19. And I created the Stranger You Know program here in the state of Connecticut. It was a program that was to create understanding that these are not strangers. 93% of offenders are known to children, right? And less than 3% are ever arrested, convicted, and imprisoned. The average predator has between 250 and 500 victims in their lifetime. So these are people who are spending their life gaining access. That's what they do. And so they live a very covert life. They are not truly, authentically themselves. They have to hide who they are, right, from the world. The same goes for any abuser. Abusers grow up in a world where they may have a predisposition. What we know about abuse, right? Abusers and their character pathology is they may be born with a certain compromise, we call it. There's a Harvard study that talks about being born more resilient, more compromised. So they may have a more compromised development in place when they're born. This is due to epigenetics, intergenerational trauma. It can be DNA, right? Like all of these things. Then you're born, and then you're born into a family system. And in that family system, you're not really loved unconditionally. You're made to feel shame a lot. You're useless. They wish they never had you. Or it could be even much more covert. It can be, oh, you didn't really, I thought you were going to be like smarter in math. I didn't realize you weren't going to be so smart in math, right? So it can be more covert. It doesn't have to be overt. And what children learn at a very young age is that they can't be themselves. Authenticity is the terminology. How can I be myself? If I can't be myself in my own world as a child, then how do I attach to the people who are healthy to me? I don't have healthy attachments. And if I don't have healthy attachments, I must be really bad. I devalue myself. And if I'm really bad, I've got to cover it with shame. Now, what we know about pedophiles is they're born with this predisposition, right? They already are. And then
I wanted to ask you about that since you just brought that up. One of my therapists started her career in a diagnostic center for pedophiles. And she told me that it's a complete myth, according to that center she worked in, that all pedophiles were abused as children.
it's such a myth.
Yeah, okay, so you agree with that?
Oh, 100%.
She said every person coming in there said they were abused as a child, as like to explain their actions, to garner sympathy. And she said we would give them lie detector tests, and 75% failed at that question, were you abused as a child? And so she said, according to the work there, which was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, it was a myth. And so what have you seen?
Yeah. So first of all, to abuse, it's a really horrifying myth, because what's happened is if you were abused as a child, people would always think, oh, you must be an abuser, right? And that is such a horrible thing for a child to carry after being so violated. It brings tears to my eyes just thinking about it. So I used to work in child welfare too. And one of the things that we used to see is that children can be sexually reactive after being exposed over and over again to really inappropriate things developmentally, right? So you go into a home and maybe someone's always got porn on, right? Or maybe they're witnessing people having sex in another room, the door's open or whatever it is. Or maybe they've been abused and they're sexually reactive. That is very different than being a perpetrator of abuse. And that's the problem, right? Is that we lived in a world where we said, oh, if they're abusing other children, right? Maybe an eighth grader abuses a fourth grader, right? Or a 15-year-old abuses a 12-year-old. Very wrong, very inappropriate. But if that's happening, then they must be a pedophile. And that is not necessarily the case, right? It's a sexual reactiveness from being exposed to inappropriate material for a child developing. So when we talk about the traumas on a child's brain, that needs to be the front and center aspect. What has this child been exposed to that has been harmful? That being said, people who are pedophiles may have suffered abuse, but that is not at all an indicator of becoming an abuser. So to this person's point there, that's exactly the correct information.
So is there like some sort of they're chemically off at birth, or just something in their makeup is off when they're born?
I think we have very little information about that, Clark. But I think what we know is that we also live in a world, so I'm seeing this more and more, where we are hearing of people who maybe never were even born with the predisposition to be attracted to children, but because they've been so desensitized by all of the pornography that people are consuming today, that they now are going into the dark web and viewing things that they would have not normally viewed, because they can no longer reach climax, frankly, in the normal way. So we have a lot of intersecting problems. We have a pornography problem, right? We have an abuse problem, where people who are abusers get away with being abusers. They're not held accountable, right? We have children who are being in some way exposed to inappropriate things, and then they aren't they're not getting the proper supports, right? And then, I mean, add in that children have access to all of the things on the internet today. By age 8, we see little boys being exposed to pornography, excuse me, in general. And so what's next? Going back to your original question, the pathology of an abuser is frankly someone who can't be themselves authentically. And imagine you're someone who was born maybe a pedophile. You have this desire. Can you ever tell anyone about it? Right? No. So what do? You just continue to manifest what you want, which is access. And so people say, I'm always like, these are people who create jobs for themselves to put them in a place where they can have access. We had a infamous case here in Connecticut, Dr. Rainier, I want to say. Oh, I'm going to forget his name. He worked at St. Francis Hospital. He was doing a growth study on children during the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And then he ended up dying, and somebody bought his house. And when they bought his house and they took down the walls for a reno, they found hundreds of reels of child pornography. He was never doing a growth study. He was publishing a growth study, but he was using it to gain access to children, right? And so this is the world we live in. Children are not safe. Every single parent needs to be teaching their children about the parts of their body that are covered by the bathing suit. There's no such thing as good touch, bad touch. That's wrong. We should not be saying that anymore, because sometimes the touch can feel good. Frankly, sometimes it can. And even the affection, the grooming process feels good. To be loved and accepted by somebody, to feel like somebody cares about you, to feel like, maybe your dad's working all the time, but this particular man in your life is available to take you to the movies, right? So there's some good feelings there. But if we can talk to children about where their bathing suit is, that no one should ever touch there. And if someone does, it's never a secret. We never use the word secret, that you can come and tell mom, and that mom or dad will protect you and will believe you, right? And will believe you. Because when I read your story, the one thing I kept coming back to is that this was a little boy who felt like he couldn't share it with anyone. That he was and that's not because, I'm assuming from what you told me in the story, it's not that your parents weren't available in some way, but they had never clearly said to you, this is what some people are not good to children. There are bad people in the world. And even if they act like they're good people and they seem nice, and even if mom or dad like them and invite them over to our house, that doesn't mean that they are good to children. And if anyone is ever going to touch you in any place here or there, and we have these conversations not once, not twice, I used to have them with my children monthly. Every month, you remind children, because there's going to be different experiences that are going to erode away their ability to stand up for themselves, to come forward. And so it feels to me like your parents didn't do anything different than what parents in that generation did. But we need to be having these conversations front and center all the time.
Yeah, I won't ask you your age, but I grew up in the 70s. And I mean, it simply wasn't, all I was taught was don't get into a stranger's car. We lived at a lake community. If some stranger comes up and tries to get you into his car, you just run away. You don't get into it. They never said, if your Boy Scout leader tussles your hair, puts his hand on your knee, moves it up to your thigh and pats it, let us know immediately. They never said, if the priest, grabs your ass or something, let us know, like none of that. It was always the stranger, the stranger, the stranger. And as you just said, 93% of it isn't a stranger. It's somebody you know.
Somebody you know and love.
Yes, yes. Next to my father, this guy was who I looked up to the most, next to my dad.
Going back to their pathology, they know this, and they prey upon the vulnerability. They know this. And so when you think about who are the most harmful human beings on the planet, anyone who's going to use a vulnerability against another person, anyone who's going to take a child and take that vulnerability and abuse it in some way. I mean, even if there was never any sexual offense, the point is that grooming process alone, the grooming process alone is extremely harmful to the developing brain.
You mentioned something during this part of the speech, and it took me back, talking about children who are seeing porn, who are seeing people have sex, who maybe are abused. I did a speech for the Department of Probation for the state of Pennsylvania for juvenile sex offenders. And the lady who was in charge, who, signed me for the speech, she said, Clark, I think the work we do is so important. We have kids who are exposed to, sex and drugs at an early age and pornography, and they're abused and they're just mimicking what they're seeing and what was done to them. So she goes, we put them into an intensive situation up until age 21 of therapy and healing and growth. And she goes, I think it's very important. She goes, the pedophile who's 40, 50 years old and has molested dozens of kids, she goes, there's nothing that can be done for that person. And would you agree with that?
100%. Yeah, like the more that someone has, I mean, I say this about, like, abusers don't, whether it's in an intimate relationship or in this child perpetration dynamic that occurs, they don't show up as an abuser. Right? But they get worse over time. They really do. They tend to become more obsessive, more, and you can't change. It's like you can't change someone who already has these character traits very embedded in them. These are people who we should never, I mean, I always say to people when I do my trainings on the stranger, because that's what I call it, because it's like, it's always the stranger, and I have the little magazine. I didn't take it out today, but I actually have the magazine my children came home with, and I'm probably hung out in the 70s with you, Clark. So the magazine they came home with in elementary school. And so my kids are 24 and 26, and they got the Stranger Danger magazine. And, this idea that we need to be really elevating the conversation about the fact that this could be someone that this child totally loves and is connected to, doesn't want to lose. Or I have moms over and over again who refuse to believe the children, because if they do, they will lose their housing. If they do, they will lose these abusers threaten them and say, your children will go to foster care. Your children, you're gonna be decimated. I'm gonna take away your children. I'm gonna take custody. I have moms right now who their children have come forward saying, first of all, I have several children who have had UTIs, urinary tract infections. They go to visit their dad. They come home with them. The mothers go to court and try to get custody. They lose custody. The courts don't believe mothers. They think mothers lie. We actually have a research study by Joan Meyer. She found that when mothers came forward about their children's sexual abuse, they were disbelieved at a rate of 85% of the time. So we're not believing mothers who are trying to protect their children. And people say women, women are abusers too. Yeah, women are not abusers at the same rate as men. Let's just be really clear about that.
Just in the past couple of weeks, there's been a few nationwide articles on female teachers, sleeping with their students. Do you see, and then you just brought it up, so I wanted to ask that anyway. Do you see where women are the abusers?
I don't see it very often. I've seen it minimally, but I would say that what you're really talking about there is not, and I'm not trying to dismiss it. You're talking about more about hebephilia, not pedophilia, right? Where you're attracted to adolescents. And I think there's another layer there. So a woman who is, say, a teacher at a high school who has sex with her 16-year-old student, horrifying, absolutely wrong, right? However, there is she is not necessarily doing it to abuse sexually. In my opinion, most of the people who are doing this, they're doing because it fulfills their shallow egos. Like, if I could have a young man who's attracted to me and he is going to engage with me sexually, that's more of that narcissistic, right? I need that fulfillment.
I'm still hot. I still got it. I can get a 16-year-old.
And or, oh, I'm beautiful and he likes me, and so they're very shallow. Their ego development is very shallow. It's very needy. And again, no way excusing this, but what we see with male perpetrators, right, is it's about coerce.
If a male did it with a 16-year-old girl, how would we view that?
Probably ego, much more about the ego for sure, not denying that. But is it about having power over? This is always the dynamic. When abusers abuse, they're abusing because they need to have control. They need to have power over. I think with men, it's more of a power over because we live in a world where men are supposed to, quote unquote, have power over, right? Do you see the difference? Does that make sense?
Take me in, if you can, into the mindset of a pedophile, and what exactly are they getting? Is it power they're getting over a young child? Is it sex they're getting over? Is it control? What exactly is fulfilling towards the pedophile?
So I can talk to you about the brain of an abuser. Pedophiles, I haven't done a lot of research recently in it. I did it quite a few years ago, but I'm sure there's more out there. But what I would say is that the attraction, the attraction is certainly to have power over, right? But also the attraction is in young and vulnerability, right? So what's interesting when we research pedophiles is we find them, of course, in family systems. Like, in other words, you could be a father of two children that maybe you've never abused or you have abused. What did we find out about Sandusky afterwards, right? His child, that his adopted child came forward after the trial, was afraid to say something during the trial, denied any abuse for a long time. And what's also interesting about Sandusky? It took 3 years to prosecute him because of his status in society. We had all these witnesses, yet it takes 3 years to prosecute a man because he has some status in society. So, Sandusky had a family system, had children, and then also was gaining access in other ways. He had a sex addiction and a desire for young people, right? And that's really what we're talking about, is this desire, like this unleashed desire where there's no way that they can even control themselves.
You yourself, besides what happened to your mother, you yourself got into a relationship with coercive control, narcissistic abuse, all of the above. So not only have you studied it, you've lived it also. Can you share a little bit of that with the audience?
Absolutely. So I always want to share it because I want to remove the shame. So I was doing this work since I was 19. I worked at an advocacy center, an umbrella center, for 35 years. I worked in child welfare, saw domestic abuse every day. I'm a therapist. I educate college social work students on domestic abuse every semester for over 20 years. Yet I didn't know I was living in that relationship dynamic. And I don't think I finished defining coercive control earlier on, but coercive control can be overt, such as with physical or sexual violence, verbal assaults, blocking a person's leeway from a room, but it is always coupled with insidious, nuanced, covert abuse. And so the psychological tactics that were going on in my family system, I couldn't understand, why I often felt like I had to explain myself, like what was wrong, like, I thought that we were happily married, but then there would be an argument over something silly, and then I would be gaslit, but I didn't know it was gaslighting. I didn't know what gaslighting was, right?
People in the audience are going to say, you of anyone should have seen all the signs. And yet when you're in it, it's tough to like pull the layers apart to really look clearly at it, right?
Well, that's number one. And number two is this, is that I, like so many people, was looking through the violent incident model. He didn't hit me.
Right.
He didn't hit me. So
Can't be a bad guy. Right.
yeah, he can't be a bad guy. He can't. Wait a minute. No, he's not an abuser. He's a good man. He's a good father. My children love him. Oh my gosh, my children adored him in so many ways. But what he was doing, so what I ended up finding out is my children were 9 and 10, and I caught him at his first affair. He had multiple, didn't know that at the time. And I went to my mom and dad's for the weekend with the kids. And while I was there, he was sending me threatening messages. I'm going to have you arrested for kidnapping. You're a horrible mother. You're the reason why I cheated, whatever. And then he was sending me other messages like, we'll go to therapy. I love you. You're my soulmate. So those were the messages I was giving. I went home, right? I went back because I wanted to keep my family together. And when my children were 17 and 19, so fast forward 8 years, they told me that on that day, I went to work to teach my college social work classes. On that day, as soon as I left the house, I brought them home. This was a Monday. After school, I picked them up. We came home. He and I, reconciled that we were going to get therapy. I went to work. He told them that I had cheated, that I could not be trusted, that I was off my medication, and that, I'm really unstable. Don't trust me. And that was the narrative he started when they were 9 and 10. Why? Because as a coercive controller, narcissistic abuser, I need to control my life. I need to control everything. And what he saw for a moment was a glimpse of him not being able to control me because I had detached, right? I had gone to my parents. I was angry. I had caught him. He had an affair with a very good friend of ours. So he couldn't control me. So what is he going to do now? Is he going to say, oh man, I got to level up. I got to not cheat. I got to be a better husband. No. If you have the pathology, what you do is you just tighten the grip. You just get worse. And so, but I'm going to do it covertly. Now, some people don't do it covertly. Some people then start physical abuse, start doing all kinds of, bad quote unquote behaviors that society believes is abusive. What he did is he spent the next 8 years eroding away my autonomy, making me guess myself. I'd go out with my siblings. I'd come home. He'd say, where'd you go? And I'd say, oh, we went to Julio's. But really what ended up happening is maybe we didn't go to Julio's because they were closed, so we went someplace else. And I hated it. He was always asking me where I was, and he'd be like, oh, are you sure you went to Julio's? I didn't, are you sure? One time I went to see a therapist, and I went to my therapist, and he's like, are you seeing this therapist? And I'm like, and I hadn't told him I was seeing a therapist. And I said, what do you mean? How would you know? And he goes, oh, I went to get hot cocoa. There's a local like Dunkin' Donuts nearby. He supposedly went to get hot cocoa. This is a man who would never go to Dunkin' Donuts. He hates like chain like restaurants and stuff like that. But he would gaslight me into believing that so what was going on, Clark? He was following me. He had my car tracked for years. My car tracked, my phone and computer hacked. He had 8 cameras throughout the house. After I left him, I found out that he had 8 cameras. He was watching me. And so my children, he spent 8 years telling them that I was unstable, that I was, their whole adolescence, they thought that maybe there was something wrong with me. And he was the fun dad. He gave them whatever they wanted. He had no parameters. And so when you are a kid who wants more freedom, what are you going to do? You're going to align with the parent who's giving you more freedom, aren't you? Right. So, this is why I didn't know it was happening to me, because I was working so hard to keep the family together. He was gaslighting me constantly, and there was no physical violence. So, coercive control is psychological tactics, gaslighting, manipulation, intimidation, isolation, love bombing, you name it. It's often financial abuse. I was working 2 or 3 jobs to make sure we could have the things I hoped our family could have. He was not contributing his fair share into the family account. Whenever I brought it up, it created an argument. I learned not to say nothing. I said, I'm not going to say anything. It's not worth it, right? And so it's legal abuse, and then it's the weaponization of children. So my ex did all of them except for physical violence.
Did your kids ever come around, come back to you and figure him out?
They did.
At what age did that happen?
Well, and so I'm going to go back to, remember we were talking earlier about how important attachment is, right? And abusers often grow up in family systems where they can't attach strongly to a caretaker, right? Because that caretaker doesn't love them unconditionally, right? And so my children had a very strong attachment to me, thankfully. And when they came home during COVID, he was so angry that they even wanted to spend a moment with me that he began doing to them the same thing he was doing to me. He locked them, he turned off the electricity in the garage so they couldn't go out and see me. He started doing some really, inappropriate, like, I don't know how else to say it besides inappropriate things. For any of your listeners listening, I would say that sometimes our children have to feel the pain of who the abuser really is to actually acknowledge it, because nobody wants to believe that a parent could be so harmful. Nobody wants to believe that.
If there's problems between a husband and wife and there's spite, you can understand that. But then when you're bringing the children in and, spiting them on top of it, then it's almost like they try to keep it bottled up for as long as they can, and then it just spills out to everyone.
Yeah. And there's again that similarity in behaviors. So I need to control things, and I will groom my victims. So what did my ex do to me? He groomed me. I met him when I was 16. What did my ex do to my children? He groomed them. Thankfully, never sexually perpetrated them, but this is what sexual perpetrators do, is they engage people in relationships, build trust, create this attachment, even if it's not an authentic attachment, so that children believe in some way that this is someone they can feel safe with. And then they push the boundaries, right? And as you know, it's obviously never a child's fault. It's actually a horrifying problem that we can't stop this. Like, I don't understand. Can you answer that question for me? Why can't we stop this problem of these perpetrators when we know there's so many children suffering, and we get, like, I just don't understand how it's not being stopped.
Yeah, I think having conversations and removing the shame and just transparency and talking about it. So you may not be able to stop the first act, but you can get the child then to feel comfortable speaking out to stop future acts. That's I guess that's all you can really hope for.
Which is what, of course, in your book, you had that moment, right? Where all of a sudden you're like, I can't take this anymore. I have to do something.
I've said in my speeches, I'm like, I can't sit on my couch with a clicker in my hand and my feet up on the coffee table watching TV and be like, I'm healed and life is great and all is well, and know that there's people I could be helping or talking to or speaking in front of or doing a podcast with. And so it's just the need to, just helping other people helps you. That's taking your healing to another level when you're helping the next person.
Absolutely.
In your husband's case, so a person who needs to enact coercive control, do we know what creates that desire in them, the need to do that? Do we know it's lacking?
Yeah, so that ability, like when you have built up so much shame that you can't be your authentic self, the only way to feel in control of your life is to control other aspects of it. And so that's sadly what these people end up doing. And then they do a really remarkable job, as you know, right? Like these are people, all of them. So again, not all coercive controllers are pedophiles, but all pedophiles are using the same exact grooming tactics as coercive controllers, right? And so, except they take it to the next level, which is a big deal. But what do we know? We know that these people are extremely harmful to society, that they are so covert. They're like charlatans, right? They're people like you would never imagine. Would you ever imagine in a million years so and so was an abuser, right? Or in your case, right? Nobody would have imagined. As a matter of fact, when I read that, like the cesspool, all I could think about was the amount of children that were impacted alone by that one human being.
You wrote a book a few years back. What was the name of the book?
The book is called Framed: Woman in the Family Court Underworld.
What was the book about?
It is 22 stories of protective mothers who have lived through the family, or trying to live through the family court system. And the stories are about how family court over and over again does not protect children from abusers. And so, again, for your listeners, of course, this happens to men too, but it happens to women and children at a much greater rate. The systems, actually, we have research that affirms the systems are set up in patriarchal norms, which means judges believe that they have the most power. And there is something called judicial immunity, where since 1607, as long as a judge has followed two particular guidelines, even if they've had malicious intent, they cannot be held to account. And so what's happening in the family court systems, it's actually quite alarming. It's going to sound shocking to some people, and we have proof, is that there is collusion. If I'm a family court judge and I have a case coming in and I have a custody evaluator that I like, then I'm going to make sure that custody evaluator is hired at a tune of between $15,000 and $70,000 per case. And that person is going to do an evaluation. And even if there has been a history, meaning an arrest, there's been an arrest of domestic abuse. There's been a situation, child welfare has become engaged because the children have suffered some form of abuse, that overarchingly, judges are going with 50-50 custody, even though we know there is a perpetrator. Many of the cases in the book, Framed, are children have disclosed sexual abuse and judges have given custody to the abuser. Clark, I have like 5 moms in the last 3 months or so, 13 weeks, who have disclosed sexual abuse of their children to the family court. Family court judges think these women lie, even if they have medical evidence, even if they have disclosure. And these mothers were robbed of they literally flipped custody from the mother to the abuser.
And why is that? Why do they feel they lie?
Because they think mothers lie, because they think mothers are dramatic, because I can go back in history. We had, if you remember the Woody Allen case,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Woody Allen, unfortunately, that infamous case behind the scenes was a gentleman who wrote a book that said that children lie about sexual abuse, and that when his name is Richard Gardner, and that when mothers become hysterical and claim to want to protect their children from a child sexual abuser, they are a parental alienator. And so what's going on now in the family court system is that fathers rights groups are taking over and taking custody from mothers who are trying to protect their children. It's really quite heart-wrenching.
I had the prosecutor in my case on the show here doing the podcast, and I asked him, why does it seem that drug abuse cases get a greater sentence than a child sex abuse case? And he said, I know how you can feel that way. He goes, and it has been the case. He goes, and the reason why is proving guilt. And he's like, if you have someone with 5 pounds of weed, you catch them with 5 pounds of weed, it's a done deal. It's over. There's no wiggle room. So they get a sentence for 5 pounds of weed. If you have a child that claims to have been sexually abused, say years prior, there's no DNA evidence, there's no trauma, and we're just going by the words of that child. He goes, it's a tougher case to prove, and we quite often will take a plea deal just to get some sort of sentence instead of trying to prove and getting no sentence. That's where that came from.
Yeah, no, and I get that, and I hear that. I also think lots of people who get arrested for substances are people of color, right? We could talk about the cocaine epidemic that occurred, and that was like considered rich man's drug. And the arrest rates were very low for cocaine during the 80s, and they were very high for other drugs.
If you boil it with baking powder and make crack, then we're going to, sentence you to much higher.
Exactly. So, and then I think also what we're talking about is this idea that children, of course, if you're a 5-year-old and you have to testify and face your abuser, is that something that you're really capable of doing and that you want to do? So lots of times we do lower the charges because we don't want to put the child through the process. And it's really unfortunate that that's the way the system is set up. The system should change so that children can disclose once. That's why every state has a forensic evaluation team, a multidisciplinary team that is supposed to be a composite of experts that can interview these cases. I was on that team here in the greater Waterbury area. And sadly, the problem is that a huge issue is that physical evidence disappears like this. You could be abused on Sunday, and let's say I was abused last Thursday. I'm a child. Today's Monday. The proof is gone, right? The damage is gone because the body heals very quickly. And so even if, and oftentimes, by the way, this is the other misnomer, right? Is that people think that abusers are immediately very physically aggressive in their sexual perpetration. And that's not always the case. It can be a slow progression over time. And so the damage is not going to be that great if it's a slow, grooming of the body. Frankly, it's a grooming of the body system too. So thinking about this from a physiological perspective, it's like the inside of your mouth when you bite it. How quickly does that heal? Heals very quickly. Within a day or two, within 24 hours, it's gone, right? And so if that's happened in the vaginal wall or on, the penis, then it's going to heal it's going to heal before a doctor even can say there's evidence. And so we used to think, this is really sad, children would disclose. This is back in the 80s. Children would disclose, and then there'd be no physical evidence, and we would say, what did we always call children when there was no evidence? We used to say they were lying, didn't we?
Little liars.
Somebody's coaching them. An angry mother is coaching them or whatever, right?
So that mentality is still going on.
Mm-hmm. It's really hard to erode these awful beliefs. That's why when I talk about coercive control, it's not invisible abuse. It could be visible. It could be visible. But the underpinning of all abuse is about one person wanting to exert power and control over another. We have to look beyond the violent incident model. It can include violence, but we got to look beyond it.
You have women, either the 5 that have recently reached out to you, or women in the book who have knowingly know that the ex-husband is abusing the child, and every weekend, every other weekend, they're sending that child back to that father to be abused, knowing, and either afraid of bringing it up because the courts won't believe them, and it could, just derail their time with their child. They would take it away from them.
That's right. This is what's going on in the family court system. It's actually quite horrendous. It's horrendous. I have a mom who she disclosed the girls were older, 12 and like maybe 10. So not little, they disclosed. The court said, looks like he did this. He went on supervised visits to start. So could you imagine you're forced into a supervised visit with the person who admittedly is your abuser? Everybody knows it, but now because they're your father, you now are forced every Saturday to see this person for 8 hours with a supervisor. And that went on for 2 months. And then he got unsupervised visitation. Sickening.
Yeah, it's that's sort of mind-boggling.
It's sickening.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How do we correct that problem with the family courts? How do we change the mentality?
I personally am trying hard to infiltrate the system. We need more people who get it and are willing to work for the family court system and then get hired maybe for a few cases. And then a judge is like, oh, like the bias needs to, it's interesting. You know what? Judges don't like it when the bias is to protect children. They want the bias to be that there's shared parenting, 50-50 shared parenting. How is it that the bias is not to protect children? So I'm training people. I have a clinician, attorney, coach training where I train people all the ins and outs of this. I have a colleague who does an expert witness training. We are trying our best to get into the system with good people, not these corrupt, colluding people who are making tons of money. We have a guardian ad litem out of Colorado who made like $1.5 million last year. We have another one where the judge, a private judge, so judges retire, they get their full pension, right? Of course, right? And then they do private judge work. And when they do that private judge work, they get paid again. And we have one judge who every single case that the attorney hired the private judge for, every single case that attorney won. That doesn't, over 20 years, you've won every case. So the system is complicit. It is literally institutional betrayal.
Yeah, and you're just talking from your state of Connecticut. Do you see this in every other state as well?
So the 22 stories come from all over the world in the book, but also I work with people all over the world. So that story I was just sharing with you is from, I believe, Utah. But yeah, so it's a prevalent, it's happening everywhere. It's kind of, I call it the hidden epidemic. Nobody's talking about it. And it is coercive control by the system, because the system is actually exerting power and control over vulnerable people.
Who is the type of person that would reach out to you for consultation, for therapy, for help? Define that person, so someone in the audience who is struggling and wants to know if you're the right fit for them. Who is the person that would reach out to you?
Sure. So I help people. I'm a therapist. And I have associates who work for me who do therapy. So if somebody's suffering these types of traumas and they want someone to provide therapeutic intervention, we also provide custody and divorce coaching. My signature program is my protective parenting program. It's actually 9 modules of work, 13 hours of video lessons. I offer it live or self-study, but the purpose of it is that when you have a child who, like this mom, whose kids are having to see their abuser now, right? And the reason why I'm seeing her is because they're so angry with her because she is making them go. She has no choice. The court is making them go, right? And so they're coming home really, of course, dysregulated and behaving horribly because they're going to their abuser's house. I mean, of course they are. So I help parents parent these children differently because it's a different kind of parenting when you have a child who suffered abuse. And then if you're a clinician, a therapist of some sort, and you want to get involved, I'm trying to really I have a self-study training. I also have, it has 14 CEs for therapists, and attorneys can join in, coaches too. I'm trying hard to infiltrate the system. We need good people like yourself doing this work, elevating the conversation, removing the shame. That's why I talk about it openly. I mean,
So if somebody wants to get a hold of you, get a hold of your program, how do they find you? Your website?
They can find me on my website, Coercive Control Consulting, or I also, you can look up iknowyourheart.com.
Thank you, Dr. Christine. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you so much. I think we could talk for hours.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many layers, to keep on, like, I had in my notes, you told me about the progression of pornography. Looking at regular porn, let's say, doesn't do it anymore for people, and then they go to something more graphic, and then they go to maybe gay, and then they go to transsexual, and then they go to child porn. Like the progression is just because this regular porn isn't fulfilling to them anymore.
It's not fulfilling anymore. Lila Mickleway, I mentioned her book to you, right? Pornhub, Take Down Pornhub. She's actually been able to prove that much of Pornhub's information was child porn. Yeah, it's just absolutely startling what's going on in the world and how children are not being protected.
I thank you for being here, and I thank you for the work you do, and I thank you for being transparent about your own family dynamics. That shows a lot of character that you're able to do that, and you're willing to do that, and you're vulnerable. Like I love vulnerability. I used to despise vulnerability. Like I couldn't allow myself to be vulnerable. I had to put up the shield, and now vulnerability is like my strength.
Oh, it's so amazing. You've listened to Brene Brown's Power of Vulnerability, right? Yeah. So, yeah, no, I speak out because so many can't. And I'm sure that's why you do, because so many can't. They don't feel safe to. So there's no judgment if people can't speak out. But boy, oh boy, no, you're not alone.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. There's another episode of the Free Like Me podcast. Dr. Christine, just peeling the onion on coercive control and narcissistic abuse and pedophiles and childhood abuse. It's a deep rooted problem in our society, and it needs to be talked about so we can stop it. So thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Peace.